Welcome to Make It, Share It, the podcast where we explore the simple but profound process to overcome fear, doubt, perfectionism, and more enemies of creativity. Make it and share it.
We'll talk to creators of all kinds, from artists and writers to entrepreneurs and inventors, to learn about their creative process, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them by making and sharing.
Whether you're an artist, entrepreneur, or someone who wants to create but feels stuck, this podcast is for you. Creativity, meet courage. All right, welcome back to Make It, Share It, the podcast where creativity meets courage. Lauren, Stephen, good to see you guys as always.
Good to see you too, Kent.
And our guest today is Jamie Winship. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And we'll talk about your story as the podcast goes on. But one of the things we love to do is just, after like a brief introduction, kind of ask a fun question to get things started. This one might be a little more serious when I get to it. But as an introduction, I love David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times.
Yeah.
And David talks about character, the importance of character, one of the things, in leadership. And he describes these two types of virtues, right? So there's resume virtues and there's eulogy virtues. Mm-hmm. Our Western society culture, we're really big on resume. It's like, tell me all the things you've done, and then I'll decide if I can listen to you.
Yeah. And
then less so on eulogy, what actually do we say at this person's funeral about who they were? Mm-hmm. So when I think about you, just knowing you from afar and what you've meant to all of us, I know on this call, and then many others, the eulogy virtues I think about in describing you, I think about somebody who's helping bring people to Jesus and just to be before Jesus and who they are and all their failure and their weaknesses and their gifts and their beauty and how God made them. And just to understand, like, no, don't believe these lies. Don't believe these accusations. Here's the truth. Yeah. And that has changed my life. So that's the best way I could introduce Jamie Winship to you guys. That's the kind of work that he's doing in the world. Now, the resume virtues, I would go second, is that he's been doing this for a long time, started this as a police officer in Washington, D.C. area, and then moved into doing peacemaking with his wife, Donna, and their family and their kids around the world in Indonesia and Iraq and many different places. Just incredible stories. And you can search those. They're all online and incredible faith-building stories that you can go listen to. So there's a lot of work in identity in particular that you guys have done through that. You have a company called Identity Exchange now. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that more. So you guys are focused on that. So those are some of the resume virtues. Again, I'm more focused on the eulogy ones. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we're just excited that you're here.
Yeah, great. I love that. I love the eulogy ones. Way better than the resume. We call that lying, the resume.
Yes.
Presentation of the false identity. That's what a resume is.
Yeah, it's so true. All right, so here's my kind of fun question to get started and maybe also get serious. But you talk about a turning point in your life is watching the movie Serpico with Al Pacino, directed by Sidney Lumet, 1973, I think is when it came out. Yep. And so, that was a huge turning point for you watching this. Whether we get into it further or not, that's up to you. But what I'm curious about is since then, and all the years since then, have you had another movie make that kind of impact on you? And if so, what movie would it be?
Wow. Yeah, I don't, it's weird when you're asking about movies because not everyone has the same taste. You know what I mean? And so you have to be careful what you share. I had another movie that impacted me, and I'll do a disclaimer on it, but I'm not recommending this for anybody. But it was a kind of an obscure movie called Buffalo 66, which I've probably watched 10 times, and I think there's only one probably censorable scene in the whole movie. But it's the guy that wrote it. Scalero, I think is his last name. He wrote and starred in it. It's the only thing he's ever done. And for me, it was breathtaking, the story. Because I like stories that are a little bit dark and the characters are not famous. You know, they're just trying to make their way, and they're kind of grotesque, sort of in a Flannery O'Connor kind of way. And they're just struggling, and you just love them, and they're so broken, and they're just looking for any good thing in life they can find. And Buffalo 6 is just basically a movie about a guy that bets on the Buffalo Bills winning the Super Bowl, and they lose on the field. The field goal kicker for Buffalo misses the field goal, and this guy put this loser in Buffalo, a blue collar guy. His only joy in life is bowling. And he puts all his money on the win, and they lose, and he can't pay the loan shark. So he goes to prison on behalf of someone else. So the movie is beginning with him being released from prison. And his whole goal in life is to go find the field goal kicker and kill him. That's his whole goal in life for making him go to prison. And on the way, he falls in love. And it's just beautiful and funny. And yeah, I think that one did. I think about that a lot because of the character development and just the way he did, how people get transfixed on a failure in their life, and they can't get past it. And the only thing that gets him past it is this inadvertent girl he meets on the way, and he falls in love with her, and that's what saves him, rescues him, is their relationship. So that was a good. Yeah, I haven't ever had anyone ask me that question. And in my office at home, I have this signed autographed picture by Al Pacino of him in the role Serpico, this big, gorgeous picture of him in that. And so I have this like Serpico altar shelf in my office. But yeah, that's a great question. I think to me, the arts are the most moving. Painting or any media is it just cuts through all the nonsense. So yeah, great question.
So it's a pretty safe place here.
Yeah.
You don't have to do too many disclaimers.
Yeah, I know. I was like, well, I'm glad that wasn't
You're
too
good.
bad. But then people go watch Serpico and they're like, oh my gosh, that was like worse, that kind of, they do that kind of thing. I didn't, yeah.
Wow.
So
that's good.
I'm excited to watch Buffalo 66 now.
Yeah.
That sounds like an amazing story.
Yeah.
And very relatable.
Yeah, it's funny and tragic at the same time. So I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So then I'd love to hear just about, so that's a turning point. Obviously you can speak to that if you want. I know for you of watching Serpico. But then, in life we have multiple of these turns where the way that we think, live, and relate completely changes.
Yeah.
And so is there another one for you that would be good to kind of hear from before we jump into what you're making?
About one of those turning points?
Yeah. Your life.
I'll tell you, it's the same thing about what I loved about Buffalo 66 and what I loved about Serpico, and is the relationship factor. And so I can tell, I'm 64, so I can go back in my whole life, and I can tell you probably the 5 relationships I've had that have just altered me. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take many. It just takes the right ones, and you have to be you have to be willing to receive from them. Lots of people miss these opportunities for different reasons, but there's a kind of humility that's required to receive from another person, and to allow them to critique you. And I'm not a big accountability person. I like accountability, and like, hold me accountable to what God says about me. Don't hold, and most of what we do is keep people accountable to what Satan says about them. Believe it or not, that's what our accountability groups are. It's like Satan running the group, because it's all about everything I've ever done wrong, and I'm going to keep saying that I did them and all that, instead of like, how does Jesus introduce you? Like, and holding them accountable to that introduction versus all the negative ones. But yeah, so it would be, it was the nurse when I was in the hospital. It was my wrestling coach in college. It was the troll who I write about in my book. It was Dave McCollum, who trained me in Indonesia. Probably those people have done the most to affect my understanding of who I am and who God is and who my neighbor is. Those 5 people. So like, my goal, of course, is to like be one of those 5 in other people's lives, because it meant so much to me. And all 5 of them were unlikely. That's what I would have never found them in a place where you would go to look for discipleship. Never. They weren't there. And so that's what I like about these sort of obscure movies is these incredibly noble people, in a bowling alley, and that's to me is more gospel than, I went to a professional discipler or group or something like that. So yeah, and I love those people. I love them so much. I can't tell them, I couldn't tell them. I try to, but how much I appreciate what they did. Anytime I'm anywhere close to, except the nurse, I've never found her again. But the other, whenever I'm anywhere near them, I go and I pay honor to them and just listen. I'm only doing what I do because of what you did, and I think that just keeps me humble and it helps me remember where I came from and how much stuff they had to put up with in me, trying to help me along. So yeah, it just makes me, I love humanity. I love humans being human. I love brokenness and I love failure. And this is what kills creativity is trying to avoid failure, trying to avoid your own faults. Yeah. I love the brokenness in people, and even in myself, I've learned to love, the cracks where Christ shines through, as they say.
Yeah, for sure.
My writing partner, who just walked out the door, she's another one. I've just had such a good time with her. We've only known each other for a couple of years, but just relationally, the way we can connect on different stuff, and her willingness to, it's taken her a little time to show her own frailty, but it's just what makes the whole process fun to me is that just being with the other person and the stuff that comes out of the relationship.
I recently read a book, Voice of the Heart, I believe, by Chip Dodd. Are you familiar with that? Well,
yes.
I became somewhat obsessed with the chapter on shame because I'd heard so much that, shame's a bad feeling. But he couches it as it's good. Like it's a good emotion because of what it can lead to.
That's right. Yeah.
And so a lot of what you just said, shame exposes that in ourselves, we're not enough. But we also bring something unique and beautiful to our spaces and our relationships. That means we need others, we need God, and that's good. And that's where creativity and our gifts shine. And so, that's very much what I see you saying there is because in the cracks and the blemishes, that's where your gifts get to shine and your uniqueness, your unique identity, and you form these relationships that, that's Kent and Coop have been that for me. And you're right. It's discipleship in unexpected places. It's not, every Thursday morning that you're getting together, and that can happen.
Yeah.
But it's also just coming together over something that either you love or just that you C.S. Lewis. Oh yeah, you too. So
right.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the power of those negative emotions and why you want to take advantage of them. They're there for a reason. I was with a guy not long ago who was really wrestling with shame, and he called it shame. He said, I'm wrestling with shame. I can't break free of it. He's, in his 50s. And I said, he was asking me if I could help him with it. And I said, and I was in a crowded situation. So I just pulled him off to the side with me. And I said, look into my eyes and tell me the very thing you did that you're ashamed of. Say it right to my face. And he was like, I can't do that. I'm ashamed of it. And I said, I know you are. But if you just look me in the eyes and say it to me, we can be done with this. But because it's all built up in your mind, and look me in the eyes and tell me what you did. Don't skip a detail. Tell me exactly what you did. And he was shaking and, because if you don't allow the shame to expose something and you move away from it, then the shame becomes the dominant, and you're just trying to cope with the shame. And so I'm holding him like this, well, say it. And so he finally just says what he did, that he has such shame. He says it to me and I say, you know what? I don't care. I could care less that you just told me that. It means nothing to me. Do you get that? There's nothing to be. And that was the end of it. He just had to, and I had to tell him,
say it out loud.
I could care less what you say. And so just to let him out of it as a human, right? I could do take your shame to the cross and all that, but I think he'd done all that. It's just look at me, I'm a human. Throw your shame on me. And then I said to him, look, and I'm not Jesus. I'm just me. Imagine what Jesus would do with that shame. Not only would he take it, he would exchange it for something else. So that's what we need to do together, is what does he want to give back to you in place of the shame? So you can do that in a community where, where you're allowed to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
When you said that fear of failure is the enemy of creativity, I've seen it in this discipleship and people that have made a big difference. For me, in like music, there's this big thing in music, and probably in writing, just books too, that people that haven't done it yet or done it a lot compare themselves to something that doesn't really exist. So they go, yeah, but when Bruce Springsteen sits down, he writes a song in 10 seconds and it just comes out of him, and then it's a number one hit. And it takes me so much more time. And so for me, one of my biggest turning points was I had a little bit of that fear. And it was the first time I was in a room with a real artist. And I was there as a fly on the wall. I was not even there to contribute. I was a friend of a friend who knew I loved that artist and was like, hey, you can probably sneak in the studio for like 30 minutes as long as you don't make a scene, that kind of thing. And when I saw a glimpse into a process of an artist who has been successful and that I've loved their music for 25 years, and it was notebooks and hard drives and hair wringing and trying to finish a song and drag it across the finish line, it like freed me to go, wait a minute, that's what my process looks like at home.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, I'm in. Now I'm off and running. So I always feel like people need to be freed to that and not compare to a romantic process that doesn't really exist for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then you move out of your own identity, right? As soon as you look at another person and say, wow, they did it that way, I'm going to do it that way, then you've lost yourself.
Yeah.
And once you've lost yourself, then at the most, you're going to be a cover band. Like at the highest level, you're just going to be a cover band. And that's okay if you want to just be a cover band. But if you want to develop your own voice, then you have to go down the journey, kind of through the wilderness, as we say, to detox of all the other voices and to hear your own voice. For me, when I look into the eyes of God and I see my reflection in his eyes, that's what you want right there. That's what he sees. You want to believe in what God believes in about you. Like, what does God believe about me? You need to believe that. Not what do other people believe about me. What does God believe about me? Or however whatever you call that, love or whatever. But you have to see your true reflection somewhere so you can see what you really look like. You have to have a process, so for any kind of innovation in a human has to be preceded by contemplation. No human can innovate without contemplation preceding it. However quick, you still have to get into some kind of contemplative process, even if you do it in 10 minutes. And that can take journal. I mean, our whiteboard over here is a new thing we're working on. And, it's in phases. And the script we wrote that we're getting ready to produce, 9 rewrites. I mean, just tough, hard, taking scenes apart, putting scenes back together, timing, all that stuff. And it's a hard process. But again, in the universe, there's no such thing as an easy process. Like, that's a lie. It's a myth. It's like, just because some person can come, like Springsteen can do it in 10 minutes, but he's still got to go the whole journey to get known. And then what do you do with fame and all of the nightmare of the whole process? It's not like magic, fame, we're all great. It's a long, tough process. The whole thing is difficult. Yeah. Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Yeah. He learned, and obedience means to hear and respond. He learned to hear and respond through what he suffered. That's life. We learn to hear the right voices and respond in the right way through failure, through struggle, through pain. That's where you learn. Otherwise, you'll just follow, the resume route, kind of thing.
You talk a lot about, the false identities, the false self, and recognizing that, and then asking the Lord for the identity he's given us, and kind of the process of, I'm sure that's something that you have to do a lot. I mean, I would. No, like, yes.
No, I'm saying, I'm shaking my head like, oh, yeah, you're not kidding.
So my question is, has it gotten easier? What is that like now, opposed to or compared to when you first kind of had that revelation?
Yeah. It's gotten easier for me to accept it faster.
Okay.
To receive it more quickly. I'm done playing around like, was that real? I'm done playing that game. We don't have enough time to keep doing that routine. It's like, you asked a question, here's the answer, let's receive it and let's move on it. So, I forget who said it, your measure of maturity in the kingdom of God is not what you can do for God, it's how much you can receive from God. That's right. Because the whole thing is about receiving. The whole thing about being a human being in this universe that we're in is about receiving. And then as you receive, it overflows out of you and you serve. Receive, serve. If you're just going to try and produce without receiving, you're just going to get template stuff. Like you'll figure out a pattern, you'll figure out how to sell it, and it's just template. And then the way you know it is it just becomes repetitive. There's episode 1 of this, and then let's do 2 and 3 and 9 and 20. It's just the same story over and over again. And it's because you're not receiving. You just figured out a formula or a template. So in the identity process, this is my process every single day. The first thing I think about when I wake up is, what am I afraid of? That's the first question I ask out loud. And I'll look at my wife and go, tell me what you're afraid of today. Because the most intimate relationship you can have with another person is to be able to tell them what you're really afraid of. If you can't tell God or your partner or whatever what you're really afraid of, then the real you is not there. And you got to be able to say it out loud to yourself. So like I said, I've been doing this a lot of this stuff. Been in all kinds of situations where your life is threatened, all those places, but the fear is valuable. It's pointing to false belief, and you need to address it all the time as a weapon, as a tool. What's the fear pointing to? I can say a lot about fear, but fear is what shuts everything down. Everything. Fear of relationship, fear of failure, all of that stuff, fear. And all fear is doing is telling you what you believe that's going to hurt you. That's all fear is doing. If you just address the lie you believe, the fear is gone, goes away immediately. So I'm like, let's just get up. Let's just face the fear. Here we go. What are we afraid of today? Get it out there. Exchange the lie that the fear is pointing to for the truth, and then move in the truth. And then by the end of the day, you're afraid again, and then you wake up the next morning and you do it. And you start with courage through the day. Yeah, and that's just the process. It's like doing push-ups. You just have to do them. And when you stop doing them, you get weaker. That's like it's the way this beautiful universe functions. And to try and find shortcuts through it is just a mistake. And honestly, there's a lot of shows on TV that are just trying to show you this magic. You do this one thing, boom, you're a superstar. That's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate. It's misleading to people.
Yeah.
Yes. What before we jump into what you're making, which is the screenplay, is what we're going to talk about. So before we do that, what is your definition of identity for people who haven't heard that, and just how that contrasts with, especially in the creative world, a lot of like radical individualism, as you try to find your creative voice, you can't listen to anybody else, including God. It's like just you. So I think it'd be helpful for audience to hear just that, and then we can jump into what you're working on.
Yeah, it's funny. We're working on 2 documentaries on another issue, and there's a psychologist that I've been paired up with, and she's the brain science person, and I'm more of the field level identity person. So like I do something with a person, then she tells what's going on in both our brains. That's how this partnership works. I love her. She's writing a book, and I was reading her manuscript this morning. She asked if I would look at it, and she talks a lot about the self and the personality. But for me, identity as in opposition to the counterfeit, which is radical individualism. Radical individualism is a counterfeit to true identity. True identity is received in community from God or other than yourself. True identity is the truest thing about you. It's the essence of who you really are, and it's grounded in love. It has inherent value. It doesn't have to do anything to be valuable. It's valuable in and of itself, just to be. That is true identity, and you just need to rest in the truth of who you are. That's it. And it's very easy to get to with a person once they've waded through the false. Once you've kind of navigated through the false, the true identity's always been there. It's always been in action. Even with people that we're working with is like we do these joy. When's some time in your life you remember joy? That's the real identity. There it is. That's it. The true. What were you doing? Well, I wasn't really doing anything. That's it. There it is. What was making you joyful? I don't know. I was just outside. That's it. That's you. That's it. Now, what does that identity do? That's the vocation. So there's identity and then vocation. You don't get identity from vocation. You bring identity to vocation, which makes the vocation life-giving to you. That's what does it, right? And so that to me is the definition of true identity. It's the essence of who you are, deeply grounded in love and has inherent value.
Love that. And that to me is that's the journey to go on, that we have to go through this process before we can really create in the voice that we've been given, and you hear that. I actually used to get so frustrated about that, especially in college, like find your voice, find your voice, find your voice. Like, I don't know how. I don't know.
That's right.
Because all I know is I love Steven Spielberg. I am making movies because of E.T. I love George Lucas. I love, and then you can continue to grow J.J. Abrams and things grow as you get older. But it's like, but what's my voice? It's hard to find it. And, I've been through a lot of worked with a lot of counselors and all kinds of cool things. But like really when I heard you say that, for the first time, explain that, it just something sort of clicked of like, this is the way to find your creative voice. It has to be received in community,
right?
And something that is given to you as a gift.
That's right.
So I just think that's so important for people to hear, regardless of whether you're creating a garden, you're creating some amazing spreadsheet. You guys are creative too, my CPA friends.
Yes.
Whether you're writing a book, making a movie. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I what's interesting is, I'm keep looking at this whiteboard over here that we've been working on for the last 2 days, but we're working on as soon as there was this recent school shooting in Georgia. So this is 43 school shootings this year already. And what's sad is we're just starting to tolerate it. Now we're just going to accept it as normal. This is what happens when you just use coping mechanisms instead of addressing something. And so now we're just going to accept it, and we're all just going to pray it doesn't happen in my school. That's the highest level we're going to go to try and solve this thing. So the school system, 3 school system called us immediately. Can you come in? And we don't know what to do about this situation. And so we are. It's all about identity. Actually, the whole thing is about identity. We can profile the school shooters. They're isolated. They're powerless. They're alone. They're trying to be seen. They're unseen. They're invisible. They're trying to make themselves seen and known, and they'll do whatever it takes to do it. Because for a child, when between 0 and 6, they're developing completely their identity, and it comes. The first part of their little infant life is I am just here, and then becomes I am what people tell me I am. That's up to 7. And so in our culture right now, like if you're in Indonesia or you're Jewish, they have naming ceremonies. They still have them. We've thrown all of that out. We just like, what's the coolest name I can think of to name this kid, and so they're not receiving any kind of identity like ceremonially, like a bar mitzvah or something like that. And so they're just pulling identity from anywhere and they're receiving it. And my psychologist friends, I was referring to her, she said to have a kid between 2 and 8 who's not being carefully nurtured in identity, it's like not feeding them. Like they're malnourished. It's like you're not feeding their body food, you're starving their brain. And so the identity gets warped, it's undernourished, it's misguided. And so then they start to get their identity from who they're with, right? So it's I am what you tell me, then it's who am I with? And then the final stage at 13 is to like about 18 is who can I trust? I am who I trust. And 90% of the population of adults never get past that 13 level identity the rest of their life, and they won't change. So when you're trying to change paradigms or change education, we can't because we're so malnourished spiritually and I don't mean religiously. That is the last thing I mean. I mean like spiritually. Like we don't know who we are. So we only trust one group of people, and if it's not that group of people saying it, we can't shift, we can't change paradigms. So how creative can you be in that, right? How creative can you be? And so you imitate, you love Steven Spielberg, and another movie I loved was Empire of the Sun. Oh my gosh. And it's beautiful, right? The whole story, and John Malkovich and all that. But then you can't get out of the imitation phase. Like that's the problem. You get stuck in the imitation phase, and you can't get to that deeper self of harmony with all of this to let the real you come out. Because one of the exercises we'll do is we'll have a simple plot going. I'll walk the team that we're working with, that we're teaching identity through false identity, true identity, and they read the story first. I say, what do you see in this story? Blah, 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 blah. This is stunning to watch this happen. Then I'll say, okay, now we're going to do a process, and we're going to read the story again, only this time your true identity is going to read it. I want you to tell me how differently you see this. So we walk through. They don't think anything is going to be different. But when you walk through and their true identity reads the story, the depth of insight they have is remarkable. So, and just another quick example of that. So we're working on an anti-human trafficking project, and our goal is we decided, let's try and see if we can just win the traffickers to Christ, and the traffickers shut the whole thing down. So that's a project. We're almost 2 years into it. I've never seen anything work as well as this has been going. It's just incredible. And we're doing it in another country to make it harder. But and so when we were building the team to do that, we used law enforcement people to kind of come up in their true identities to come up with a strategy. But then we went to enact the strategy. We didn't want law enforcement people because they're in a certain paradigm. Brought this other team into it. Spent about a year working on identity, wholeness, and resiliency with them. Then we took them into the other country. It was 15 of them or so, and just sent them out in the city and say, write down everything that you see in your true identity. And they all came back in, and they all shared what they saw in the city, and we just wrote it on a whiteboard, and we had a whole strategy of what to do. Because each part of the body got to contribute. Instead of some celebrity or some expert, we didn't want any experts in there. And I mean, we're documenting this, interviewing the people involved is so incredible. And they targeted this one particular human trafficking organization, and in 18 months, it's gone. It's not even there anymore. It's not like part of them left. I mean, when you go to the location where they were running this, it's empty.
Wow.
And the guys that did it would be kicked out of any law enforcement because they're not experts and they don't know what they're doing. So but what they did was they came up with this incredibly creative way to infiltrate that place. Mm-hmm. And when they went in there, all they did was kept taking away the fear of everyone they met. That was their strategy. Let's take away their fear. Because fear is what's driving them into that industry at every level. Once they weren't afraid, they shut the whole thing down.
Praise God. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
But it's all creativity. It's all creativity, right?
Yeah.
The guys that did it, I just love them so much. There's, if you just heard, you'll see when the documentary comes out, you'll be looking at these people going, these guys aren't going to accomplish anything. Like what are they? Their theories of what works. It was just like, that ain't going to work. I even called my son's a federal agent, and I called the federal agent and the head guy in the country we're going into to let them know we're coming in. And I said, I just want to make sure you guys know we're here, and this is what we're doing. We don't want to get in the way of anything you're doing. We're going to go over here and target this place over here. And he said, that's fine. What are you going to do? And I said, well, and I told him our strategy. He's like, that is not going to work. That is not going to work. He goes, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And I said, all right, I'll call you in 2 years. But I only had to wait 18 months to call him back. But that's because the federal agencies, the international, they're not creative at all. That's zero creativity. Seriously, you need to let artists come in there, give them a problem, and let them work through it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So cool.
I love that. I mean, creativity ultimately comes from the Lord, honestly. Right. I mean, that's what he's the source. It made me think of like John 4 and the woman at the well, where his disciples, if Jesus had said, hey, this is how I'm going to transform Samaria. I'm going to talk to this woman that has this past. And they're like, what? They would have been like, what? Yeah. This makes no sense. But he was created. I mean, he's Jesus, he's God, fully man, fully God. And he uses probably this really strange creative tactic, and lots of people get saved. And so I think it's very Jesus of you guys to do that.
Right. And that's one of the questions he asked the disciples. He said, did you see that woman? You guys didn't even see her.
Yeah.
Like you all you were interested in is whatever, you were hungry or whatever. You didn't even see this human being standing here. That's how in a formula you are. You can't, you miss opportunity. And we say this all the time. Jesus didn't come to tell us what to do. He came to show us how to know what to do.
Yeah.
He's teaching us how to be creative. He's not giving us a formula and saying, do this. And when you hear the Samaritan woman taught in church, it's like, Jesus went to a well. He used these 3 points as an analogy to cross-cultural barriers. Like, it was just like, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. He said to God, give me an idea of what to do in a patriarchal village that won't let a Jew come up into the town. Like, there's no way for a Jewish person to go up there and talk to these people. What's the bridge? Who's the bridge? And the father says, a woman that is willing to talk to you, that can still go back up in that town and display forgiveness to the town that's objectified her. It's brilliant. Yes. It's like the most brilliant strategy once it's in play. But when you present the strategy, it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. We're going to go into a patriarchal society with a woman. That's already out. I mean, the Southern Baptists would have thrown that out immediately. I mean, they wouldn't even have tolerated that at all.
Oh, no.
So you're going to use a woman in a patriarchal culture. That's dumb. And we're going to use a woman that has a bad reputation. That's even dumber. Mm-hmm. But we're not sending her up in that identity. We're sending her up in her true identity. And her true identity is not object of men. It's leader of men. So we're going to make that little flip in her. And then we don't even have to tell her what to do. Jesus doesn't even have to tell her what to do. He's just like, see who you are. And she's like, yep. Off she goes.
Yep.
In the truth of who she is. And brings all the men back. How long has she been a leader of men? Her whole life. Her whole life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But she didn't know it.
She didn't know it.
And that's the beauty amazing. For any of us, that experience. But we have to keep coming back to the well going, tell me again who I am. Okay, there you go.
So true.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for the sake of time, I'd love to do this. So we've kind of hit some of this, but, you have this initial career as a police officer, and then, going overseas with your family into some of these crazy situations to do this identity work and to bring about peacemaking, right? And it's very intense situations. Like we said, a lot of stories about that. Then you're back, and I'm condensing a ton, but you're back and you're doing identity work with football teams, NFL teams, and doing all these things with schools and companies. And then now you're writing a screenplay, right? And so what I love about that is you've said that your identity, and all this is untie of knots, is like that fundamental identity that you have. Mm-hmm. So what does it look like to take that from, and I know you didn't always know that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like now that you look back to take that identity from the police force to, doing work overseas to, identity work, and now into a screenplay. Tell me about what that's like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is why we like to do this exercise with people. So, so I can be a bit revisionist in this because of where I am in my life. But so if I'm doing a contemplative exercise, like we call it joyful memory exercise, and so when I do that exercise, a joyful memory to me is when I'm like about the age right before I went to see Serpico. But you're looking for the person's memory in that age range around, second grade, like around in there. But we don't say that. Just like, what's an early memory that you have of just being joyful? And so for me, it was me and my brother playing with these plastic army men. And I go back to this place all the time to remind myself of who I am. So we're playing with these, and so he would set up one team and I would set up one team, and all he wants to do is shoot rubber bands and throw firecrackers and blow them all up and shoot them all. He now works with Young Life. I don't know how that relates, but he does. So, but he would get mad at me because my team would be forming relationships with one another. Like I would have little subplots going, and they're forming relations. He's like, let's get into the fight. Come on, let's get into the fight. And I'm, I want my team to be friends and all that stuff. And that is my true identity in action. The State Department, when they interviewed me, that's what they saw. They identified that. What they're identifying is what has been there since God knit me together in my mother's womb. And all humans have this. It can get incredibly crushed and fractured and broken, but it's still there. And so when I went into the police department, by the time I was in the police department and I had an understanding of how God works in all of this, that it wasn't just me setting up these things, but that somehow God or love was interested in this, when the rest of the world just wants to shoot them and throw firecrackers at them. Like that's what the world wants. I'm counter to that. Like my life is going to be counter to that. And so that was deep within me. And all you're waiting for is those moments of like, bingo, there it is. And Serpico is, bam, there it is. There's a guy, he doesn't want to be in corruption. He doesn't want to just arrest everybody. Like he's trying to go the other way and the system is killing him and fighting him. And my heart just leapt like, there I am. Right. And this is why we want to write books and television shows and sing songs. Oh my gosh. And even do amazing engineering. All of it is this beautiful identity being expressed. It's your identity is your gift to the world. And so in the police department, I knew I could arrest people, but it didn't take any creativity to lock people up. It took zero. So I could always fall back to that. Just like when we're, working with Hamas or whatever, it doesn't take any creativity to shoot somebody, but that's just imitating. It takes incredible creativity to figure out how to have peace in a situation. Mm-hmm. And when I was in a domestic dispute, how do we never come back here? That's my goal. How do we never come back here again? What can I do in the 20 minutes that I'm going to interact with these violent people so that I never have to come back again? And I just had to learn. I didn't know what to do, but I would just keep asking God. This is contemplation before innovation. But how fast can you contemplate was my question. Like I need about 60 seconds of contemplation and then innovation. But then it was like, God is up to it. God is up to that request or that task. Or sometimes like with the human trafficking thing, it took us three straight days of fasting, face on the ground, the CIA and the FBI and all those guys to come up with the plan we came up with. Like that. So, but it's what I want people to realize. It's just this, it's the real true you all along. And all you're doing is getting back to the truth of who you are. Now do that, be that right there. Once you have that, now tell me a story from that, or write me a song from that place, because that place is a gift to the world. And you don't have to be the best singer in the world, but those words, that message. And so I realized as I went along that it was not like a challenge to go on these 911 calls, but an invitation and an honor to go into those places. And then when the State Department interviews me, the Lord's just like, I'm bumping up the invitation. We're just raising the level of the invitation. No different than what you've always done. Play with your little army men, help them make friends, but do it out there in the Arab world, or do it in China or somewhere. And that's all you're doing. And you're just becoming more and more of an expert in understanding your own identity and how to give it away. And to realize that it may cost you, part of the cost might be sacrificing your life. But okay, that's okay. We're willing to do that. And so do you have to sacrifice your life to write a song? In a way, yeah, you do. Yes, you do. It's hours. It's rejection. It's sense of failure. You're fighting all the false, and they all have to die. They all have to die so the real you can keep coming forward. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful process. But I've failed in every imaginable way. I've failed. I got suspended 3 times by the police department for things that didn't work. But you have to just be willing to go through it, and I was positive I was going to lose my job on the last right before the State Department came to me. It was because of the last case I worked. Well, it was the last case because they came to me. But that case, I was positive not only that I was going to get fired, but that I was going to get arrested myself for what I did. And it turned out to be like the Samaritan woman. When I explained it to my captain, he was like, "You're going to jail for this." But when it worked out, it was like the most brilliant thing I've ever done, kind of thing. So that's the risk factor. Yeah. So it's an honor to step into. Faith is the substance of the things you hope for. That's what it is. It's the evidence of the things you can't see yet. And without it, it's impossible to please God. What that means, you don't have to have faith. Like, I got to have faith to do this. It's like, you got to have hope in things you can't see. That's what it is. And with that, the reason you can't please God is because he's up ahead of you going, come try this. Come try this with me. And you're like, I can't do it. And he's like, come on. And he's so pleased, not because you did something for him, but because you got to discover another level of what he did when he made you. And you can look in the mirror and go, wow, I didn't know you did that when you made me. And it makes you love him. And then it makes you look at the other person, the Hamas guy or the whoever, and say, wow, what did God do when he made him? And he doesn't know it. So I'm here to help him discover it. And if we have to die, and a lot of our guys were killed, we're going to die to do it because we can't die. So,
True.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, where you said it might cost you your life. I mean, obviously in the stuff that you're doing that, I mean, it really literally could cost your life. I hadn't thought about it as a songwriter or as a writer.
It costs you your life. Yeah,
it does. But it's worth it. And like you said, because we can't die.
Yeah, that's right. And you can't lose. So right. It's like, and people are like, wow, you're brave because you went and did it. I said the other day, I was with a group of people. It was tough. It was 8th graders. And I said, I'd rather be leading a Taliban group than you guys because it's harder. It's more difficult. And the Taliban will just kill you. And that's the end of that. But 8th graders will just reject you over and over. It's painful. And so, it's relative. I'm serious. It's relative. Yeah. The amount of courage it takes to walk in a public school or to stand up and sing a song in front of people, like my actor friend, like you're every day putting your self-value in the hands of another person that could care less about you. And you're willing to keep doing it. I actually don't know how actors and songwriters do it because it's just, you just got to be able to, you have to die to yourself all the time like that. But that's right. But you have to be willing to it. But the key is, so Jesus never was in a win-lose scenario. He's never saw himself in a win-lose scenario. So he never had to self-protect, right? As soon as you self-protect, you've lost track of your true identity and you're out. Yeah. But when you realize this is only a win here, then the full me can keep coming out of it. I mean, I have so many good stories of helping train younger professionals how to do that. But I always tell them, look, when you walk into any room, you do not get your identity from that room and you do not lose your identity. You take it with you when you go in and you take it with you when you leave. So you go into that room free. Because if you're going to get it there, you've already lost. And if you're going to lose it there, you've already lost. We have to train that isn't, and it just takes practice and discipline. But I'll just tell you real quick. So we had one young woman that we recruited to come to the Middle East. She was a cashier at a store. My wife met her and just saw something in her and, said, have you ever thought about doing something in the Middle East? And anyway, we brought her in, trained her, and then took her over, and she had no aspirations for this kind of life or anything, but wow, was she great at it. She's still there. But she was young and never been out of the country. And we put her in position in this country. And then we had to leave, which was good because then she was implanted in the right place and no one paid attention to her. They paid attention to us. Anyway, she had to go to another country on her own. And when she was coming out of that country, the secret police of the country kind of figured out who she was. And she was in an airport somewhere in Asia somewhere, and she got abducted by the police and taken to a deserted part of the airport. And they strip searched her, and so she's this young, never had anything like this happen. And they were incredibly rough with her, and they left her with no clothes on in a stall in a bathroom in a part of the airport. She didn't know where she was, and they left a phone with her because they wanted to see who she would call. That's the tactic. So she called me. So she calls me. I'm in the States. She's like sobbing hysterically, and I recognized her right away, and I said her name, and I said, calm down, breathe. Let's go, breathe. Let me hear you breathe. And she starts rhythmically breathing. And I said, tell me what's the situation you're in. She tells me, and I said, okay, like, what are you going to tell her? What am I going to tell her? Pray? Some ridiculous, all things work together for good or something like that. I said to her, look, you know your identity. They cannot take that identity away from you. They have not taken any identity away from you. In the truth of who you are, you know exactly what to do. I don't know what to do. You do know what to do. You know what to do. Do you hear me? And she said, okay. And she hung up. I didn't see her for 18 months after that. When I finally was with her one time, I said to her, and she never talked about what happened. And I said, hey, remember the night you called me? Like she would forget. I said, remember that night? She said, yeah. And I go, what happened? And this is her answer to me. I will never be afraid of that scenario ever again. That was her answer. That's the answer you want.
Wow.
And she is like fearless. She's not brave. She just knows what to do. And she knows how to know what to do no matter what happens to her. So she can't lose. Do you see? So no matter what kind of rejection you face or whatever, it's like another cop I prayed with in a bad shooting. I just said to him, he wasn't a believer. And I just said, look, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you how to know what to do. I'm going to introduce you to the one that knows what to do. And I'm going to teach you how to hear the one that knows what to do. And then when you do that, you'll know what to do. And that's all we do with people. It's just, I'm going to teach you how to hear. I'm going to teach you how to listen to the voice that's always been there your whole life. You just never paid attention. Let's pay attention now. And then whatever you hear, you tell me, and we'll do that together. And that's how we do it. Even if we're writing a story, it's just the creative process. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm just giving space, Cooper, Lauren. I have a few more questions, but give y'all space.
No, go for it.
Go for it, Kent.
What's been the biggest challenge in writing the screenplay for you?
Like going back into the dark places of my life again. Yeah, that's been the hardest part with other writers with me that don't know any of the stuff that happened. And like some of my dark failure, dark stuff. Because when you go into the dark world, you can't go in unaffected by it. That's a lie for sure. And so, and surviving all of that stuff and all the coping mechanisms that you use when you're like 24/7 in deep fear, you figure out how to cope with it, and it's not all spiritual, and a lot of it's really harmful. But and to sit with to be able to talk about that with my co-writers was hard. It was hard. It's hard on my wife too. She was in the room because they said I said there's just some things I'm just not going to talk about. So I'm just telling you right now. But I will go as far as I can because it's not autobiographical. It's not an autobiography. It's characters, but everything in it's true. And so yeah, Donna was with me in all of it. And just being we got abducted together at one point, and all just to go back into we've been arrested together, in prison together, and to go back all through that stuff is not easy because God gives you the grace in the moment, but even in the memory, there's not the same level of grace, right? So it's hard to go back to them, and you have to be very careful that the Lord's inviting you back into that. Because you have to go in the present tense. You can't go back in the past or you'll die there. You have to go back in the present tense and walk around it in the present tense until you can talk about it. But yeah, I think that was the hardest part. And then coming home, like we'd be in these hours long sessions of writing and then come home and then just me and her. And it's like, listen, I just don't want to talk about it. That was hard. It was a kind of exploration. I think any kind of writing where you're writing seriously, I think you need to go on that journey. Even if you don't write about it, it's still healthy. I always tell God, there's no room I'm going to keep you out of. Like, you want to go anywhere in here, you can go anywhere you want, anything in the past. And I think that's just healthy, because an unhealthy person has closed rooms, closed off rooms. And that's too bad, because those rooms are filled with creativity.
Yeah.
They're filled with it, but we're afraid to access them. And it sounds stupid or something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that was the hardest.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What, you early on when I was listening to some of your stories, you talked about the identity of like a militant peacemaker, and then Untier of Knots, kind of came. And then, so I'm curious about on this journey of identity and hearing from the Lord about your identity. How is that pretty typical, I guess, if you've been able to walk with someone for a while, that it becomes clearer over time?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's like you're in general ed, and then you're getting more and more specific and targeted. So like my latest understanding of myself is nurturer, which has been hard to receive because I was raised not to be that. But then and it's not like you suddenly become that. It's like you were that the whole time. The pain of that is then recognizing the times I missed it in my life, where I could have embraced it and I didn't. It's not anything. It's not like condemning, but it's just like, shoot, yeah, I really didn't. And then in that journey, you have to be careful, because it produces anger in a person when you start to discover things about yourself that you missed. It produces a kind of anger, but the anger is beautiful, because all humans can only be angry about injustice. Mm-hmm. So God is angry about injustice, and so whenever any human's angry, it's because of real or perceived injustice. So if I'm with a Hamas dude that wants to kill everybody, it's because he's operating from a real or perceived injustice. And then the other team's acting against their real or perceived injustice. That's why it can't end, because instead of addressing the injustice, we attack the other person, right? And which just creates more injustice. So when you're going kind of backwards in your life and you realize, man, I never wasn't nurtured in my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I didn't. Now's the time, for whatever reason, I'm going to start to tap into that. Then all of a sudden I have all this emotion that should have been nurtured. And now it's all just flying out of me and I can't control it. And I don't know what's wrong and all that. And so then the injustice typically for a human is something was stolen. That's what the injustice is. Your land was stolen. But more deeply, your dignity was stolen. Your childhood was stolen. Your security and safety was stolen from you or withheld from you, like the malnourishment. And so then you have to forgive where it was stolen. You have to go through the process of, okay, that person didn't mean to steal it, or they did, whatever. You got to let them go in order that God can restore back what was stolen. That is the key. Not even identifying all that stuff is helpful. What's helpful is that the person can't repay what was stolen. They can't give it back to you. They can't give nurture back to you. But God can. This is a miracle for people. Love can restore back to you anything that was stolen. So let's let love give it back. And that's what's the most regenerative to people is that then they can let go of the injustice. They can let go of the person and the anger and all of that. So nurture for me has been a very deep process. And fortunately, the people around me, like my co-writer, are very good at, I can say that to her or them, and they get it. And they're like, okay, we're going to help you walk through. We now know that you're walking through that. And this is the kind of community you want to be in. Right. And if you're in a writing community that's just let's just make the hits and make the money, they don't care about that stuff. They'll if you want to nurture, we'll find somebody else. But a good team will say that's probably going to be key to what we're doing. And that's probably why right now you're hitting this. How do we incorporate this into our creativity process? And that makes you feel loved, welcomed. You're not afraid to fail. You're not afraid to share the emotions that you're going through. We are very open to one another and very vulnerable to one another, but because we all know the truth about ourselves, right? We all know our own brokenness and woundedness. And so I'm telling you, it just makes, and then we think, wow, how does a character show the discovery of nurture suddenly in their life. Now you're writing some seriously good stuff, because then every person watching, the goal is that they'll look at that incident or that process and go, oh my gosh, or to have a character say something like, you're only mad because of injustice. No human is ever mad except for injustice. Well, that's just a mean person. No, there's an injustice. Let's get to the injustice and we can find peace. Yeah. Right? So you can demonstrate in characters how to run a decent peace process, which has never been run. We have never in history seen a peace process work. Not one single example of it. But we could do it. We can do it. So how do we show it? People have to see it in order to do it. So where do we show it? Art. We sing about it. We show it. We write poetry about it. We paint it. However we can to get past, because if you're going to go teach it in Kennedy School of Diplomacy, which we tried, you get pushback because it's too sacrificial. That's why. Yeah. Like when I taught it at the postdoc program on worldview, and at the end they said, "We love the worldview picture you're painting. We think it's true, but it seems like it requires your death to do it." And I said, "It does." And they said, "Well, we can't have that." And so here we go back into the other one, back into the self-protection and self-promotion.
Man,
but if they saw a movie about it, they'd listen to it. They'd watch it. It goes past all their.
Yeah. Well, it's a perfect way. I know it's been an hour, so I want to honor the time. It's a perfect way to end that into exhortation for those listening, who are creating. And as we've said, all kinds of different things we've heard from you guys that you're making and sharing. So I think a big question is going to be, how do I do this? What does it look like to get this kind of help, right? Because it needs to be done in community. But I will just share identityexchange.com. I've talked about it's Jamie and Donna's site. Tons of resources on there you can go to. My personal favorite has been the encounter guides, the audio guides. So to have, you literally just can have Jamie and Donna just guiding you into the presence of Jesus and doing this work. And I listen to it at least once a day. And you might be like, wait, you're repeating? Oh yeah. I just repeating. And we need help. There's these times where we want to I should be able to do this on my own. I've been a Christian for 20 years. No. Like you need help. And so I think those guides, I just can't commend them enough. You can find them on identityexchange.com. And then Jamie's book, Living Fearlessly, is out. You can also go through that. And I think it was you that tells that story about a professor that's like, you haven't read a book until you've read it 10 times.
Yeah.
I haven't read it 10 times, but I'm on the journey. So, there's a lot out there. So I just get a hold of some of these resources and go make and share things, and just that is the call. Receive your identity. You can go make and share. So that's my exhortation to our group. So thank you, Jamie, for being on the show with us.
My pleasure. It's great to meet you guys and be with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you on the next episode of Make It, Share It.
Just go for it. Don't think about what comes after or what came before. You just gotta bend your knees, take a deep breath, and jump. And you might think, what if I fall? Well, what if you don't? What if you fly?